Hello, I'm Erik Wait, and this is an update for the KIldalton Biblical Theological Studies YouTube channel. Happy New Year. We're in January 2026. I haven't put out a video or a series in the last few weeks, but YouTube likes it if you keep putting out content that they can then sell to advertisers. I don't have mid-roll advertisements. I don't have the ability to keep before or after advertisements. So I try to avoid advertising as much as possible. I don't have likes and subscribes. I don't have Patreons. This is all self-funded through the gracious gifts of the Lord has already provided me. So I haven't put out a video in a while because most of my work has been going on off camera. Recently sent a book to a publisher. So finishing editing and rewriting during the holidays. I spent most of my holiday time not celebrating the holidays, but really just getting the work done. So I took a couple of weeks off of work. I work for NASA. I'm a civil servant with NASA. Sent a book to the publisher. It should be out in about 6 months, around June or July 2026. It is a presuppositional defense of Sola Scriptura. So basically, the apologetical method of Cornelius Van Til, particularly as taught by Greg Bonson and John Frame, who was one of my professors in seminary, and applying this thought specifically to the doctrine of Sola Scriptura. I did a whole series on what I prefer to call Christian worldview apologetics. I don't like the term presuppositional because people think you're doing a petito principi fallacy. That is, you are doing a false form of circular reasoning and failure to really present an argument for your case. But that's not what goes on in Christian worldview apologetics, or even presuppositional apologetics. Presuppositional apologetics is defending an entire worldview rather than incremental pieces leading up to the Christian worldview, starting with, say, with a generic God. It also recognizes that everyone has a worldview and everybody interprets facts according to the lens of certain presuppositions of the worldview. And so it deals with and defends the Christian worldview as a whole rather than as little bits and pieces, and shows how other worldviews cannot provide a justifiable epistemology, a means of knowing things, and they have to borrow from a worldview that can provide the necessary preconditions for intelligibility, such as the laws of logic, uniformity of nature, a uniform system of ethics, and so forth. So there, in a nutshell, that is the distinctive of Van Tilian, Cornelius Van Til, presuppositional apologetics. Of course, that's overly simplified. So the problem is presuppositional apologists have primarily focused on responding to atheism and haven't spent as much time applying this thought to other worldviews. So even within Christianity, so what I'm doing is applying this to the doctrine of Sola Scriptura and defending it against the charges, misconceptions, misrepresentations of Roman Catholicism. Well, the second part of presuppositional apologetics is assuming, for the sake of argument, the other worldview, and then doing an internal critique and demonstrating how it is self-refuting, arbitrary in its assertions, and inconsistent. And so I also do that with Roman Catholicism. So hopefully that book will be out around June or July 2026. Takes a while to go through the editing process, reviewing process. Then you have to create the folder, create the cover of it, and so on and so forth. So that's going to take a while. The other thing I'm working on off camera is revising written materials that I have used on this YouTube channel, KIldalton Biblical Theological Studies. My courses on bibliology, the attributes of God, and so forth. And I've taken those and turning them into books. Professor John Frame, he did this for his courses that he taught in seminary. He helped start Westminster Theological Seminary in California, which was later changed to just Westminster Seminary, California, back in the 1980s. I was at Westminster I started in 1996. So What you now buy in terms of his books, such as this is the Doctrine of Knowledge of God. This is his book on epistemology. The cover has changed on this. This is sort of, I would say, the first book you should read from John Frame. So this would be handout material, printed handout material that you stick in a binder, and then later on it'd get edited and then formatted into a book. This is his book on the doctrine of Christian life, so ethics. A lot of his books are really, really, really thick. I think I have just about everything he has published. I think probably one of the most under-recognized, acknowledged, and yet I think he'll theologians of the last 100 years, and yet I think he will prove to be and will eventually acknowledge as really one of the giants of the faith. Theologically and philosophically, and I considered it was an honor and privilege to have him as a professor. Had a huge impact on my thinking. I would say my approach to apologetics, I have taken his triperspectivalism. I don't consider myself a triperspectivalist. I take it and sort of tweak it just a little bit. He would use a three-sided pyramid for a worldview, normative, situational, and existential. I changed it to rational, epistemology, metaphysics, and ethics, and I do it more in terms of a pyramid. If you watch my courses, you know what I'm talking about in terms of how we understand this. I tweaked it just a little bit. So my goal is, all the coursework that I've written, going through it, editing it, and putting it into a book form, just as John Frame would do with his coursework. My goal is to make this available either absolutely free or as cheap as possible. I'm currently creating a website in which these sources will be available. I could do self-publishing, say through Amazon or something like that, but they're going to take at least half of the finances from it. And consequently, I have to end up selling it for like $10 in order to make $2. Seriously, because the printing costs, everything else. So now you're paying $10 for something which only $2 is going to support the channel. I would rather give it away than just $2 for the material and make it available downloadable. This is still in the works. I haven't quite figured this out. So you would be able to go onto the website and download it either absolutely for free or maybe $2 to cover the overhead, or put in a support button. Hey, you can download it for free and then give whatever you can afford or you feel like giving. That kind of thing. I think I would rather do something like that. That way, if you can't afford it, you can download it absolutely for free. And if the Lord should put it on your heart to support the work, then you can donate $5, $2, whatever. The main thing is so that the website would be self-supporting. That would be the main goal. Not to make profit or anything like that. I want to teach freely. I want to give freely. The weird thing is, sometimes people don't value what they get for free. So if you had, for example, a bottle of wine, or that's inexpensive, and you said, this is $100 bottle of wine, people are like, ooh, they don't, psychologically, they will appreciate it more and think more of it because I paid $100 for it. Therefore, must be a really good wine. Meanwhile, it could be $2 wine, $10 wine, because they're being impacted by how much they paid for it. So then if you give something away, then people don't think much of it because they don't have to pay for it. There have been professional musicians who people pay hundreds of dollars to go hear in a concert. And these professional musicians sort of go undercover and they go play in a subway, New York subway, playing a violin or whatever. And people walk right on by and completely ignore them. People don't pay attention to them. And they don't realize this person is actually a professional that in another context, people pay lots of money for. So it just goes to show you, if you get something for free, sometimes people don't appreciate it. It's kind of like the grace of God. Many people don't appreciate the grace of God because it is free. They feel like they need to pay for something. So just drinking a little bit of coffee here. So my goal is to take all the coursework I've currently done and then make that available either for a minimal charge or downloadable for free. I'm also working on new coursework for KIldalton Biblical Theological Studies here on YouTube. Hopefully get started in 2026. Next one will be on ecclesiology, the doctrine of the church. So that might be a 10-part series on the doctrine of the church. Now, every theological subject is related to every other theological subject, and there's always a little bit of overlap. So the doctrine of the church is going to relate to the covenant because the church is defined by the covenant. So I've already done a series on covenant theology, so there'll be a little bit of overlap, but I need to get into an understanding of the old covenant church and the new covenant church. Stephen in Acts chapter 7 and his martyrdom refers to the church in the wilderness, the ecclesia in the wilderness. So yes, it's a church. Old covenant church, new covenant church. It's one vine or one olive tree that the Gentiles have been grafted into as part of the promise of Abraham in the book of Genesis, that he would be a father of many nations. All right. So ecclesiology, and of course, that also includes signs of the covenant, baptism, and the Lord's Supper. So I'll go much more in depth on the issue of baptism and the Lord's Supper, and how are we to think of children in the covenant in that. All right, ecclesiology. I'll also do a short series on tongues in Acts chapter 2, 1 Corinthians, and the Westminster Confession of Faith. That writing has already been completed due to the length of the material, even though there's only 3 parts, tongues in Acts 2, tongues in 1 Corinthians, and then the Westminster Confession of Faith. It would probably get broken down into 6 parts because each one of those is so long. But that's already written. That's ready to get published and uploaded. So I'll probably do that series as well. In fact, I might do that before I do the course on ecclesiology. I could do it in a shorter sort of knockout. Now, also off camera, I'm doing a lot of reading. I'm always doing a lot of reading. I spend maybe 2 hours a day in the morning drinking coffee, and sitting and reading before I head off to work. I have a stack of books by Michael Heiser that are up here somewhere up behind me. Books on full preterism and Christian nationalism. These are 2 big controversies currently going on in the church, particularly within Reformed circles. I've watched every video I can find by Michael Heiser. If you don't know Michael Heiser, is the late Dr. Michael Heiser. He was an Old Testament scholar, professor, with a particular emphasis on, you might think of spiritual warfare. He had a really great sense of humor, kind of a real humble guy. There are a lot of things I disagree with him on, but he spent a lot of time on dealing with things such as the Giants in, not the football team or baseball team, but on the Giants in Genesis chapter 6, the Nephilim, and all that. Really insightful in the work he's done on that. I have some issues with some of his hermeneutics, his overuse or dependency on extra biblical documents. Nevertheless, I think he has a lot of great insights on a lot of things, so I'm planning to read through all his books. I've already watched all the videos. So the book he's most known for is The Unseen Realm. This is a revised edition. Beautiful, beautiful publishing. I haven't got started on it yet, but beautiful publishing. The publisher, just the way everything's laid out, the cover and everything else. So, and this has additional material than his previous edition. Man, whoever published this, Luxem Press, just beautiful work on this. Then he has a book on demons. He's also done a lot of refutation, a lot of the ancient alien astronaut theory nonsense. That stuff's great. It was done on angels, on revising Herman. So I think you can glean from Michael Heiser, benefit from the good stuff. So eat the meat, spit out the bones. That's got to be your approach really to everything. Test all things and hold to that which is true. He did some work on the book of Enoch. Enoch is a non-biblical, non-canonical book. So this is the actual book of Enoch. And he has 2 books on the book of Enoch. Dr. Phil Kaiser and his book on canonicity, which is probably on my shelf somewhere. I think he has a better understanding of the book of Enoch in relation to the canon and Jude's citation of stories that's not derivative directly from book of Enoch. Dr. Phil Kaiser asserts that based on internal and external evidence that actually Jude and Enoch are drawing from a common source, not that Jude is citing Enoch. In short, that's the argument. So whereas Dr. Heiser asserts that Jude is taking from the book of Enoch, he doesn't consider Enoch canonical, unlike the Coptic churches. Anyway, I'm not going to go into that. One of these days, when I get through all this stuff, I'll probably do a video series on that. I have 4 burners on my stove and 10 pots I need to cook. That's the way I live. I've always got multitude of projects going on. So always travel with a book. Whether you have one in your truck, if you're sitting there, waiting for somebody to pick somebody up, if you're at the airport, if you're at the dentist office, or whatever, always carry books around with you because you can always use that time to read through a book. All right. And then full preterism. I started reading a bunch of books on full preterism. I am a partial preterist. I'm not going to go into basically Matthew 24, for example, is fulfilled in the destruction of Jerusalem. Full preterism denies there isn't a full consensus within full preterism. Full preterism thinks all prophecy has been completely fulfilled. There's nothing future. And some of them will deny the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ, as the historical church has always understood it, and a future bodily resurrection of humans. Instead, when you die, you immediately get a new body. So it's not this is what they teach. It's not a resurrection of that which went into the ground, but it's basically a body replacement. That's sort of a synopsis of it. So I started reading those books. Dr. Ken Gentry has written on it, and I think he's currently working on some works. Dr. Ken Gentry, one of his specialties, I would say, is within eschatology. I want to wait and see what he publishes and puts out. If Ken Gentry doesn't do the full presuppositional response to it, as I think it should be done, then I'll write something. Then I'll say, okay, but if what Ken Gentry does, or some others, if I think they've fully adequately dealt with the issue, then I don't need to. But to respond to full preterism, you have to deal with the hermeneutics. You have to deal with the hermeneutical lens through which full preterism, or any other worldview, or any other interpretation, any other theology, and if you aren't dealing with that, you're wasting your time. You cannot just throw verses back and forth at each other. You have to deal with the hermeneutical issues. And what I've read so far and videos I've watched so far, I've already found a number of flaws, serious flaws, in the hermeneutics and understanding of text by full preterists. So maybe 2027, I'll get around to writing on that and videos on that. If I had somebody else to do more of the behind-the-scenes stuff, such as editing books, I could probably get to it faster. Then Christian nationalism. Oy vey, oy vey, oy vey. Christian nationalism. Christian nationalism, in one sense, is sort of the next stage of development of theonomy and reconstruction, but they're not synonymous. And it's not a monolith. There are different versions of it, which we can expect. Not all Reformed theology is the same. Not all Calvinists are the same. Not all Baptists are the same. There are variations within these theological groups. So we shouldn't expect there to be, within full preterism, there isn't a full consensus. So we shouldn't, within presuppositionalism, there isn't a full consensus. The people take Van Tillian thinking in different directions, so forth. But so we shouldn't expect it, to be 100% agreement among them. That being said, there are some certain elements within Christian nationalism that I find to be extremely dangerous. I find certain questions that are given to them that they laugh it off and duck. There is elements of kinism. What is kinism? Google it. It's a form of racism. there definitely is. While I totally agree on the issue of national Israel and the Zionism that has arisen within evangelicalism over the last 100 years due to dispensationalism. I agree with their assessment and what's wrong with all that. Okay? I grew up with that. I agree with all that. However, it's another thing to develop conspiracy theories regarding Jews and as if they're somehow running everything. They also, and I'm getting into a little, they failed to make a distinction. There's ethnic Jews, religious Judaism, and then political in terms of national Israel. And they're not all the same. You can have someone who is, in terms of their biological history and their family, they can trace it back to Jews, but they don't practice the religion. They don't keep kosher. They don't keep the Sabbath, and so on and so forth. So they're not religious Jews, and they really have no affiliation with political Israel over there in the Middle East. But ethnically, that's what they are. And then there's some who are not only ethnically, but also in terms of Zionism, they bought into the politics of that as well. But if you observe how they live, they don't keep kosher, they don't keep the Sabbath, they're not, and they will observe Jewish holidays the way some people follow they're not really Christians, but they observe Christmas and Easter. So twice a year they might go to church or go to mass, but they're not really Christians. You know what I mean? They're sort of nominalistic. And the same thing in the Judaism. So they don't keep kosher. They may or may not be circumcised. They don't keep the Sabbath. Da 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 da. So, but that happens within Christianity. And it happens within Judaism. So they might be ethnically and nominalistically religious and somewhat politically. So when you're talking about the Jews, you have to tell what are you talking about? And there are some that are really politically Jewish, in terms of Zionism, but they're broadcasting their radio show on a Friday during the time in which if they were really Jewish, they would be observing the Sabbath. Okay, so if you don't make these distinctions between these various groups and you just refer to the Jews, well, the Jews who are behind criminal activities or behind sinful activities, such as the porn industry, go look at those people. Are those people observing the Sabbath? Are they circumcising? Are they keeping kosher? Are they following these Jewish distinctives? Or they just happen to be ethnically Jewish, and this is the business they got into? If you're not making these distinctions, then it's like taking somebody who is a nominal Christian and involved in the mob. Do you know how many people in the mob would they'd go to mass, or they would either pay off the local priest for this, that, and the other thing? They're not really Catholics, not really Christian, but because they're Italian or Spanish or something else like that, they have this loose affiliation. Well, same with the Russian mob. Do you know how many people in the Russian mob will sort of tip the hat to the Russian Orthodox Church, right? And they use a lot of the symbols and icons and all that kind of stuff, kind of like in the John Wick movies. But they're not really Christians. But they're just they're not really Russian Orthodox. They don't really believe in it. They just have this sort of cultural affiliation with it. So if you're not making these distinctions and you're making these broad sweep comments about the Jews or the Russian Orthodox or Christians who are involved in these activities, I think you're doing something really wrong. All right. That's just in a nutshell some of the problems I have with some parts of Christian nationalism. And then there's the kinism issue. Google kinism, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay, so those are just on a surface level some of the issues I have with some of the Christian nationalism. So I'm spending more time watching videos and listening. Now, these sort of wacky movements, they come. So I'm approaching 60. I'm 60-ish. So I've been watching this stuff for decades. Some sort of controversy will come up. And there's people arguing for this and that. And then there's people who respond. And then the H-bomb gets dropped. Heresy. They get called heretics. And they write and they respond. And then it kind of goes away. And then time goes by. And then another one pops up. And then whatever the issue is. And then and then let's go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And what happens in all these debates and charges and going back and forth, they're not listening to each other. They're not a lot of straw man arguments, a lot of false assertions, and a lack of failure to make clear as to what the heck it is you're talking about, which adds to the confusion and the heat. A lot of heat, not a lot of light, a lot of heat going on back and forth, and then it kind of fades and dies away. A few years go by, and then another comes up again. So these things come and go, and unfortunately, a lot of very naive, uneducated, manosphere people, young men, would jump on these bandwagons, because they're easily led into these things, and they jump on these bandwagons and following all this nonsense, only to then sort of burn out. And when it's over, they leave the faith, or they finally realize it was an error. And meantime, they've wasted a lot of time and money supporting this nonsense. So my advice is, when these things pop up, just don't jump on a bandwagon. Just observe. Just observe. Take notes and observe. Don't argue for it. Don't argue against it. Just observe and see what's going on, particularly if you're a pastor. Now, if you're a pastor, you can have the sense of, hey, my people in my congregation are jumping on this bandwagon. Therefore, I need to understand it in order to minister to people in the congregation, to warn them against it, or find out if it's correct and right. And this is something we should be supporting. And sometimes in denominations, we'll put together an entire study team to spend a year studying this particular heated issue. But just because they have a team of people studying it doesn't mean they actually rightly understand it, because those who are arguing for or against it are so lack a clarity in explaining things, and they have more heat than light, and don't define their terms. If you notice, almost everything I teach, I define my terms all the time, and so consequently these things happen anyway. And these will fade away, and then a few years from now, another thing will pop up. And a lot of times these things that pop up, sometimes it's the same players in each one, or it's somewhat related. This fire went out. Think of like a flare. You have a fire, and then you have these pop-up fires. This will later give birth to this, which will later give birth to this. And there's these various streams of thought going on this. All right. This is the history of the church. This is the history of the church. This has been going on for 2,000 years. There's nothing new under the sun. These things come and go all the time. A lot of times, underneath it all, what is wrong about some of these movements isn't new. It's just a recycled, old, wrong document. Or sometimes there may also be a correcting of a long-going and ongoing wrong doctrine. So, all right, so that's what's going on behind the scenes. I got a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, but I thought, well, I should put out a video because YouTube wants you to keep posting stuff and let you know what's going on. But what I could really, really use and would appreciate if you would pray for me as I continue the work behind the scenes, if you're so inclined. Also, I have another YouTube channel. Don't really talk about it here, and I don't talk about this channel on that one. So I'm a certified sommelier with a quartermaster sommeliers, French wine scholar at the Wine Scholar Guild. I've been into wine since the 1990s. Certification from the Wine Educational Trust. I have another degree in enology winemaking for over 10 years. I've been in whiskey, particularly focused on Scotch whiskey. I have various certifications. I've in whiskey. I have a diploma from the Edinburgh Whiskey Academy. I've been studying to pass the Master of Scotch exam with the Council of Whiskey Masters over in Scotland. I passed the blind tasting. I passed the written, passed the oral, but due to respiratory and breathing issues, I couldn't pass the blind tasting. It's 3 days of exams. So since January 2025, I've been going through immunotherapy, getting shots, taking pills. I'm about 85 to 90% recovered. I'm doing much better. But most of the videos that you watch thus far on my channel, I have to do heavy editing to edit out mouth noises, breathing issues. I have to take breaks in order to catch my breath because I'm dealing with these respiratory issues. And so I try to do as much as I can. I'm about 85, 90% improved over that. So I'm very thankful for that, but I still need to improve. So the thing I'm working on off camera has nothing to do with this is preparing for blind tasting exams. Hopefully my nose and everything will be working. Basically, it's 8 whiskeys, Scotch whiskeys. They used to be 30 minutes. Now they expanded to 45 minutes. And that's pretty intense. So you have to be able to identify cask to use, ABV, age, producer, be able to describe it really, really, really well. So I'm hoping to be able to pass that. I'll be back, hopefully, if everything goes well, back in Scotland for my 5th trip to Scotland in 2026. A lot of the things in this channel are inspired from my trips to Scotland. KIldalton is a Scotch Gaelic term. It means the son of adoption, in reference to St. John the Evangelist. Then when Jesus was on the cross, said to John, "Behold your mother, Mary, Mary, behold your son," because he was giving the care of his mother Mary over to John. John was the only apostle who was there, one of the disciples who was there at the foot of the cross. So KIldalton is a reference to St. John. If you ever didn't know what that was, people see the name of the channel, they don't, what is that? It's Scotch Gaelic. So I'm a big fan of Scotland. My house is decorated in Scotch Gaelic Christianity, crosses and so forth. Alrighty, so I hope you are doing well. Hope you've been blessed by the work I'm doing here. I don't, on this channel, get into, there's things I will not do. If you want to grow a channel, stir up drama, cause controversy. So this person responds to this, and then they fire back. That gets people watching, and then people tune in because they like the drama, people going back and forth and attacking other people. I don't do that. 2, so I made a commitment before I started this channel. Wasn't going to ask for money. Wasn't going to attack people. Now, if there's a theological issue I got to deal with, and this person is a representative of this, say Rob Bell. I've made reference to Rob Bell because he has tenets of liberation theology, or someone else. I'll mention it, but I'm not going to do a video in which I focus on Rob Bell in order to draw attention. This channel is intended to be sort of a liaison, a halfway between the seminary and the layperson, to try to bridge that gap. That's really the focus of this. So I'm not attacking people. If I wanted to grow the channel and just get attention to it, I would pick the top 5 biggest Christian YouTubers, find things I disagree with, and I would go after them. And that would grow the channel because it would get attention because people are searching under that name. I'm not going to do that. That's not what this is about. I'm not into YouTube drama, trying to avoid all that kind of nonsense. So don't do anything that feeds the ego. Don't do anything that draws unnecessary attention to me. It's not about me. It's about teaching the Bible and theology to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry, right? Do it for freely as I've been given. I'm freely giving away. And don't do something just because it feeds the algorithm, Try to avoid these typical pitfalls. I don't do those thumbnails in which there's sort of an exaggerated emotional response to things. You know what I'm talking about? You see these ridiculous thumbnails? No, that will work. That will grow your channel. But I'm not doing that. I can't stand that stuff. So I do use a little AI to be more creative now in my thumbnails, but I'm not doing anything exaggerated emotions and that kind of stuff. You get the point. So I'm not following the typical pattern of YouTubers and doing all the goofiness and silliness that goes on. So, alrighty. I hope you've been blessed by the work that I do here. Again, the only thing I would ask from you is pray for me as I continue to hopefully recover from these respiratory issues. I've been dealing with this since the 1980s, my last year in the Marine Corps. I've had periods in my life dealing with respiratory issues, something I inherited from my mother. And it comes and goes, but this has been one of the worst bouts of dealing with respiratory issues. And hopefully in 2026, I'll get some relief. All right, until next time, may the Lord be with you, and grace and peace.